Sections 4.4 and 4.5, cellular respiration. Cellular respiration is the process of releasing chemical energy from sugars and other carbon-based molecules to make ATP when oxygen is present. This process takes place in the mitochondria of all eukaryotes. Plant cells will use this after completing photosynthesis. They'll make sugars in photosynthesis, and they'll break down those sugars in cellular respiration to produce energy for all the processes they need energy for. Animal cells will carry out cellular respiration after the organism eats. We'll take in food, break down that food in the presence of oxygen, and use it for energy. And you'll breathe out CO2, and you'll also get rid of some water because that's part of the equation as well. Anaerobic respiration literally means respiration without oxygen. Does not need oxygen to take place. Two processes we're going to talk about is glycolysis and fermentation, which is actually going to be covered in section 4.6. So we'll just mention it now, but these two processes. Aerobic respiration needs oxygen for it to take place. So aerobic respiration is part of cellular respiration. The two parts to it where oxygen is needed is the Krebs cycle, which we'll talk about at length, and the electron transport chain of cellular respiration. Both of these need oxygen. If oxygen is not present, the respiration will be taken care of in a different process called fermentation, which we will be talking about in section 4.6. So glycolysis is the start of cellular respiration. Glycolysis itself is actually anaerobic. It doesn't need oxygen for this part of the process. Okay, and glycolysis breaks down glucose, a 6-carbon sugar, into 2 3-carbon molecules called pyruvates or pyruvic acid. Okay, so here is glucose, the 6-carbon sugar, and it requires a little bit of energy, or it's going to produce a little bit of energy in form of ATP, and it's going to make these 2 pyruvates. Okay, so literally breaks in half here, releases some energy enough to make ATP, and it'll get these 2 3-carbon compounds called pyruvates. Again, this is an anaerobic process. It does not require oxygen for it to take place, and it takes place in the cytoplasm of the eukaryotic cell. Okay, so glycolysis makes 2 ATPs. There's one product. 2 pyruvates. That's the second product. And 2 NADH, which is a third product. Now, NADH is similar to NADPH that's produced in photosynthesis, but obviously there's a lack of a phosphate in there, so NADH is in cellular respiration, and NADPH is in photosynthesis. I always remember that the P for photosynthesis comes from that process. Where these products go after glycolysis depends on whether or not oxygen is present. If oxygen is present, it will go to the second part of aerobic respiration called the Krebs cycle. If oxygen is not present, then these 2 products, these 2 pyruvates, will go to fermentation pathways. Again, section 4.6. Okay, so the Krebs cycle will take the products of glycolysis, which is, of course, the 2 pyruvates, 2 ATPs, and 2 NADH, and it's going to use those to make these other energy-carrying molecules, more NADH, and this other one very similar, FADH2. These 2 things, these high-energy or electron carrier molecules, will go to the next part of this, which is the electron transport chain. Okay. So it's going through this process to produce energies that carry energy. That's these 2. To the second part of cellular respiration, called electron transport chain, or ETC, from the breaking down of pyruvate. This takes place in the matrix of the mitochondria, this space between the intermitochondrial membrane, all in here. Okay, and it is aerobic because it requires oxygen. And this is kind of a brief summary of what's happening. So pyruvates, which are produced in the cytoplasm, will be brought into the intermitochondrial membrane. These pyruvates are going to get broken down. It's going to produce a little bit of ATP, 2 molecules of ATP, and these other high energy carrying molecules called NADH and FADH2. These are high energy or electron carrying molecules. And the last part of it is carbon dioxide is released. So carbon dioxide, what you breathe out after respiration, this is where it's coming from. This is breakdown from pyruvates. CO2 is released, and there's one of the products of cellular respiration. The second part of aerobic respiration is electron transport chain. Okay, and what's going to happen is it's using oxygen and energy carrying molecules, the NADH and FADH2 from the Krebs cycle, to produce a bunch of ATP. Okay, this happens on the inner mitochondrial membrane, so this is happening right on this membrane. Okay, all around there. And it is aerobic, it requires oxygen. So what happens is, if we were to simply talk about this, ATP, up to 34 molecules of ATP from the 2 pyruvates, will be made from electron transport chain. Okay, water and heat are also released. Okay, so remember, water is also a product of cellular respiration. We're going to put this equation up in a second, but water and CO2 are products. Okay, sugar and oxygen are reactants, and you're going to get a little bit of energy out of this in the form of ATP and heat. Those will also be products. So here's the equation for cellular respiration. C6H12O6 plus 6 oxygen will yield 6 CO2, 6 molecules of water, and energy in the form of ATP and heat. Okay, so if we're writing out the equation in numbers, C6H12O6 plus 6O2 yields 6 CO2 plus 6 H2O plus energy. And the energy is in the form of ATP and heat. Okay? If you were saying this in words, you would say 1 molecule of glucose plus 6 molecules of oxygen will produce 6 molecules of carbon dioxide, 6 molecules of water, and energy in the form of ATP and heat. And just like with the photosynthesis equation, you're going to want to know the balanced chemical equation. That's this. And you're going to also be able to write it out with words. Okay, so just like I said previously, just like that. Okay, cellular respiration and photosynthesis make a cycle. Basically this is photosynthesis. Photosynthesis, the products are oxygen and glucose. Oxygen and glucose are the reactants for cellular respiration. Okay, cellular respiration produces CO2 and water. CO2 and water are the reactants of photosynthesis. The differences being the light going in to photosynthesis is from sunlight. The energy going in is from sunlight. And the energy coming out from cellular respiration is ATP and heat. Okay, so these reactions are actually like the opposite of each other. The products of one reaction are the reactants of the other. Photosynthesis using the products of cellular respiration, and cellular respiration using the products of photosynthesis, right? Photosynthesis makes sugar and oxygen from water and CO2. Cellular respiration makes water and CO2 and ATP from sugar and oxygen. Okay, so where are these products produced in cellular respiration? Carbon dioxide is coming from the Krebs cycle, so that's coming out in that first part of aerobic respiration, called the Krebs cycle. Water is coming from the electron transport chain, the very end of it. Okay, for every glucose molecule, we'll get 2 ATPs from glycolysis, 2 from Krebs, and up to 34 for electron transport chain, which is a total of 38 ATPs produced. However, it takes 2 molecules of ATP to fuel glycolysis, so the net gain is 36 ATP maximum.